In the summer of 64 AD, as flames consumed the eternal city of Rome, onlookers claimed they spotted a lone silhouette against the blaze Emperor Nero, reportedly performing a song while his capital perished. But who was this figure who turned the core of civilization into a stage for terror? The answer lies in a narrative so grim, so entangled with murder, matricide, and madness, that it forces us to reconsider how deeply power can deform the human soul. This is not just the account of a despot, but a terrifying portrait of how unchecked authority can warp a man into something inhuman. Nero's rule began with hope, yet spiraled into a living nightmare. Remembered as one of the most corrupt eras of imperial decadence, his name became a byword for brutality, his story written in both blood and ruin. The future tyrant was born into a society where familial loyalty meant little when compared to ambition. Within the imperial household, parents and children conspired against one another, mothers poisoned sons, spouses plotted each other's deaths, and no relationship was immune from treachery. Nero would come to perfect these deadly skills, eclipsing the cruelty of even his most ruthless predecessors. Originally named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, Nero was born on the 15th of December, 37 AD, during the reign of his great-uncle, the infamous Emperor Caligula. As a member of the Julio-Claudian bloodline, Nero was marked for prominence. However, the roots of his moral decay were sown early in the perilous environment of Roman politics. His father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, died when he was merely 3, leaving him in the hands of his power-hungry mother, Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina was far from the traditional Roman matron. As the sister of Caligula and daughter of the adored General Germanicus, she wielded both lineage and ambition. Cast out by her brother over allegations of conspiracy and infidelity, she returned to prominence when Claudius took the throne in 41 AD. Her striking beauty was only rivaled by her cold cunning, and she navigated the dangerous waters of politics with the precision of a seasoned predator. Young Nero watched his mother bend the imperial court to her will. He saw her seduce Emperor Claudius and become his 4th wife in 49 AD. He witnessed her eliminate adversaries and gather influence with ruthless determination. In this warped setting, murder became routine, and deception was a necessary survival skill. Instead of learning wisdom and restraint, Nero was immersed in treachery and bloodshed from a young age. Guided by Agrippina, Nero's education was tailored to match her ambitions. She appointed the philosopher Seneca as his mentor, not because she sought his ethical growth, but because Seneca, newly returned from exile, owed her his rehabilitation. The irony was stark. One of Rome's foremost moral thinkers was charged with instructing a boy who would become its most infamous killer, though neither yet knew how dark Nero's path would grow. The consolidation of Nero's claim to the throne necessitated the removal of all rivals. Chief among them was Britannicus, the biological son of Emperor Claudius, who stood as a legitimate obstacle. Agrippina launched a calculated campaign of persuasion, ultimately convincing Claudius to adopt Nero in 50 AD. The emperor, already aging and possibly suffering from slow poisoning, proved susceptible to her manipulation. By the following year, Nero had received the prestigious title of Princeps Juventutis, signaling his status as heir apparent. The final move in this dangerous political game occurred in 54 AD, when Claudius died unexpectedly during a banquet. Though officially attributed to a fatal bout of indigestion from eating tainted mushrooms, ancient chroniclers like Tacitus and Cassius Dio strongly suspected foul play. The leading suspect was Agrippina, who is believed to have enlisted the notorious poisoner Locusta to ensure her husband's demise before he could reconsider his choice of successor. With Claudius gone and Britannicus effectively neutralized, 16-year-old Nero rose to power, becoming the youngest emperor in Roman history. Confronted with a fait accompli, the Senate had little recourse but to endorse the new ruler. However, Nero was no innocent adolescent. He was a carefully groomed creation of one of Rome's most calculating and dangerous women. Initially, Nero's reign showed signs of hope. Under the guidance of Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, the young ruler presented himself as a conscientious leader. His debut speeches before the Senate were well received, filled with promises to honor the body's dignity and uphold the Augustan model of constitutional governance. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the empire might be spared a repeat of Caligula's horrors. But hidden beneath Nero's polished exterior, darker ambitions simmered. His once symbiotic relationship with Agrippina began to deteriorate as he grew resentful of her dominance. Agrippina had not maneuvered her way back to power and installed her son on the throne merely to fade into obscurity. She intended to govern through him, to serve as the unseen force steering imperial policy. This expectation would become her downfall. She had molded a creature she could no longer contain. The brief tranquility of Nero's early rule lasted scarcely a year before blood was shed. The first victim was Britannicus, Claudius's true-born son, and the final viable challenger to Nero's legitimacy. Although only 14, Britannicus embodied everything Nero dreaded: a blood heir with a stronger claim and the charisma to unify potential dissenters. His mere presence was a constant reminder of Nero's status as an adopted ruler, not a direct descendant of Julius Caesar. In 55 AD, Britannicus was murdered, a chilling milestone in Nero's evolution from figurehead to active conspirator in Rome's deadly power plays. The killing was meticulously orchestrated, demonstrating a level of cunning far beyond Nero's years. During a palace feast, Britannicus was served wine pre-tested for poison, as was the protocol for imperial family members. But the true danger lay elsewhere, carefully timed and expertly concealed. When the boy remarked that the wine was too warm, cold water was poured in to cool it, water tainted with a lethal toxin prepared by Locusta, the same infamous poisoner believed to have orchestrated Claudius's death. The effect was immediate and brutal. Britannicus collapsed mid-meal, his body convulsing violently as the poison tore through his nervous system. Horrified guests looked on as the young prince writhed, frothing at the mouth and gasping for air, dying before their very eyes. Nero, unmoved and already displaying the ruthless detachment that would define his rule, ordered the dinner to proceed, casually attributing the boy's death to an epileptic fit. But none were fooled. All present knew they had witnessed a cold-blooded execution, and with it, the beginning of a dark and terrifying chapter in Rome's history. Britannicus's assassination served purposes beyond the removal of a political rival. It was a symbolic break from Nero's mother's dominance, and the first unmistakable sign that he would not hesitate to shed familial blood to protect his throne. The message resounded clearly. Blood ties offered no protection from the emperor's wrath. Agrippina, watching her son's metamorphosis with growing alarm, began to fear for her own life. She had molded a ruler, but in doing so, had forged a creature she could no longer control. The woman who had masterminded the downfall of Claudius, and likely others, now found herself no longer the puppet master, but a potential target. Her efforts to retain influence only hastened their estrangement and sealed her doom. This murder also marked the start of Nero's psychological collapse. The ease with which he orchestrated his stepbrother's death, his chilling indifference afterward, and the satisfaction he appeared to draw from such unrestrained power revealed a man increasingly consumed by moral decay. The privileged youth, raised in opulence, had discovered that the ultimate indulgence was the unchecked authority to take life without consequence. Though Roman society was no stranger to political bloodshed, even hardened senators recoiled from the audacity of a child's murder committed in plain view during a state banquet. Those who had once hoped Nero would usher in a return to principled governance quickly realized they were contending with a ruler far more dangerous than they had feared. A precedent had been set. Nero would not hesitate to eliminate anyone, even a child who crossed him. The toxin that ended Britannicus's life represented more than a weapon. It symbolized the moral rot that had begun to spread through Nero's soul. Each killing numbed him further, lowering the barrier to the next. With every act of violence, the emperor slipped further into the abyss. The emperor, who had once pledged mercy and a return to constitutional order, had now unveiled his true character. One driven by a predatory instinct. Following the death of Britannicus, the imperial palace turned into a realm of hushed whispers and nervous glances. Uncertainty loomed over everyone, as closeness to power had become a deadly gamble. Nero, having spilled blood for the first time, discovered a savage craving that would only intensify with each act. The murder of Britannicus was more than a calculated political move. It signaled the emergence of a serial killer cloaked in imperial regalia. The young prince who perished at that banquet table was not the last, merely the opening victim in a long procession of casualties under Nero's bloody reign. Agrippina the Younger had spent her life mastering the lethal intricacies of Roman power. Yet she now faced a rival unlike any before her own son. As Nero asserted more independence and began wielding violence freely, the woman who had engineered his path to the throne grew increasingly marginalized and exposed. The assassination of Britannicus had delivered a chilling warning. Not even kin were immune to imperial retribution. Agrippina grasped the grim reality her title as Mother of the Emperor no longer offered her protection. Their relationship had never been rooted in affection, but in mutual ambition. Agrippina viewed Nero as her vehicle to absolute power, while Nero had leaned on her political maneuvering and merciless strategies to secure his rule. However, as he grew into his role, Nero began to resent her efforts to maintain dominance, and her assumption that she would share in his authority. The woman who had once been his fiercest supporter was now evolving into his most formidable foe. Tensions escalated over Nero's romantic entanglements and lifestyle. Agrippina strongly disapproved of his affair with Acte, a former slave, deeming it beneath the dignity of the imperial house and potentially destabilizing for the dynasty. She also criticized his increasing passion for public theatrics, chariot racing, and other pursuits she considered unworthy of an emperor. In any other family, such disputes might have remained private, But in the imperial court, personal grievances were inherently political. The final break came when Agrippina began to vocally challenge Nero's leadership and even hinted at backing rival claimants to the throne. In a moment of anger and frustration, she is said to have declared that she could just as easily elevate another member of the imperial lineage, perhaps even Britannicus, had he lived. Whether she meant it or not, the threat was unforgivable. Nero could not abide the presence of someone who possessed both the knowledge and the means to engineer his fall from power. His choice to have his own mother killed marked a descent into a new depth of brutality, one that shocked even the morally bankrupt standards of Rome's ruling elite. In Roman society, matricide ranked among the most abominable offenses, a violation of the deepest familial and societal ties. That Nero would even consider such an act made it evident that he had utterly discarded any semblance of moral restraint. Once a pupil of Seneca's ethical teachings, the emperor had become a creature of cruelty, willing to go to any length to secure his throne. Yet, assassinating Agrippina was far from simple. She was a seasoned survivor of palace conspiracies and had outlasted multiple attempts on her life. Surrounded by loyal bodyguards, cautious about her diet, and deeply suspicious of everyone, she posed a daunting challenge. Any straightforward method would be perilous and demanded an intricate, covert strategy. In true Nero fashion, the solution he devised was both extravagant and implausible. Rather than resorting to poison or contracting a killer, he orchestrated a Baroque plot involving a specially engineered boat designed to collapse and drown Agrippina during a ceremonial voyage. The scheme mirrored his flair for spectacle and his conviction that he could script reality as he did his dramatic performances. Nero extended an invitation to his mother for a festival at Baiae, a popular coastal retreat along the Bay of Naples. The apparent reconciliation between the two seemed heartfelt. Nero acted with uncharacteristic affection, sharing meals and fond memories with Agrippina, giving the illusion that their rift had been mended. Yet, beneath this facade, his lethal plan was unfolding. The customized vessel was a marvel of sinister engineering. Built to break apart at a precise moment, it was meant to simulate a tragic maritime mishap, while erasing Nero's most formidable rival. The plot demanded exact coordination, trusted collaborators, and a stroke of fortune. Nero believed his flair for the theatrical and meticulous preparation would yield the desired outcome where more direct methods might not. This 59 AD assassination attempt would later be remembered as a prime example of Nero's morbid inventiveness, combined with gross ineptitude. His elaborate effort to eliminate Agrippina with a sinking boat reflected not only his theatrical excesses but also his profound disconnect between dramatic fantasy and tangible reality. The plot's failure ultimately revealed more about Nero's mindset than its execution ever could. That evening, Agrippina boarded the specially designed boat, unaware of the trap. She believed she was simply being ferried back to her estate, following the celebrations. While the vessel appeared ordinary to the untrained eye, it concealed mechanisms intended to collapse the deck and split the hull once out at sea. Nero's engineers believed they had crafted the perfect assassination device, a floating death trap that could rid the emperor of his mother while preserving the illusion of innocence. The plot began to unravel almost from the outset. As the vessel pulled away from the shore, the mechanisms intended to destroy it failed to activate with the sudden precision Nero had envisioned. Instead of a swift and catastrophic collapse, the boat began to list slowly and take on water, alerting those aboard that something was seriously amiss. The crew tasked with ensuring Agrippina's demise was soon grappling with a malfunctioning death trap and a very much alive imperial matron, who quickly grasped the nature of the betrayal unfolding around her. In the ensuing chaos, Agrippina's quick wit and survivor's instinct kicked in. Contrary to her son's expectations, she remained calm and began swimming toward the shoreline. The woman who had outmaneuvered political assassins for decades was just as adept at surviving an attempt on her life at sea. Her companion, Acironia, was not so fortunate. Mistaken for Agrippina amid the confusion and darkness, she was killed by the assassins attempting to finish the job. News that his mother had survived hit Nero like a lightning bolt. The emperor, who had fancied himself the mastermind of a flawless execution, was now confronted with the horrifying reality that Agrippina, alive and furious, knew beyond doubt he had tried to murder her. Far from solving his problem, the botched assassination had escalated it, turning his mother from a manipulative rival into a relentless adversary with nothing left to lose. Nero's reaction laid bare the depth of his terror and the base instincts driving his decision-making. Unable to process the failure of his theatrical conspiracy, he turned to brute force. If dramatic flair had failed, then brute violence would have to suffice. The emperor, who had attempted to stage his mother's demise as if it were a tragic performance, now cast aside all illusions and moved toward direct, uncompromising slaughter. The grim finale of this familial conflict played out at Agrippina's coastal villa, where she had taken shelter after surviving the marine ambush. Nero dispatched a group of Praetorian guards, led by a freedman named Amidst, with a single, brutal mission: finish what the doomed vessel had failed to achieve. No more theatrics, no more cunning, only blades and certainty. As the assassins entered her home, Agrippina understood instantly why they had come. The woman, who had once orchestrated the deaths of emperors and enemies alike, met her fate with the same icy resolve that had defined her political life. According to the accounts of the time, she exposed her womb to the blades and told her executioners to strike there first, the source of the monster who now sought her end. Her final words combined defiance with a tragic acknowledgement of the twisted legacy she had helped bring into the world. The killing of Agrippina was more than a typical imperial execution. It was an act of matricide that appalled even Rome's battle-worn citizenry. By murdering his own mother, Nero had transgressed a boundary that even the most vicious emperors before him had never dared to cross. The deed was so grotesquely unnatural that it pushed Nero beyond the pale of civilization, casting him as more beast than man. In the wake of Agrippina's demise, Nero's inner moral decay came fully into view. Rather than exhibiting remorse or offering any rationalization, he seemed to bask in a newfound sense of freedom and dominance. He had vanquished the last individual capable of truly challenging his rule, and had done so in a way that showcased his supreme power over life and death. The boy, once molded by philosophical teachings, had evolved into a matricidal monster, and disturbingly, he appeared to revel in the transformation. With no one left to restrain him, Nero's rule plunged into an era of unbridled indulgence and ruin. The emperor, formerly kept in check by mentors and kin, was now unleashed, free to chase every desire without opposition. The result was a parade of extravagant excesses so grotesque that they might have been laughable if they hadn't inflicted such profound harm on the empire and its people. Nero's metamorphosis into a flamboyant despot illustrated how absolute power can utterly distort a man and strip him of duty. His obsession with the stage and performance became the hallmark of his later years. Convinced of his own brilliance as a musician, actor, and charioteer, Nero demanded that his subjects share in his self-delusion. He took to performing publicly in arenas and theaters, coercing Rome's elite into attendance and forcing them to applaud his mediocre talents. Once powerful senators found themselves reduced to an audience of sycophants, their survival dependent on the emperor's perception of their enthusiasm. These spectacles were not merely exercises in ego. They symbolized Nero's profound misapprehension of what it meant to rule. Roman tradition held virtues like discipline, honor, and civic duty as sacred. An emperor was meant to lead armies, uphold laws, and preserve the dignity of Rome. But Nero's focus had shifted entirely inward. He craved adoration, ovation, and artistic acclaim, not respect as a sovereign. His personal life mirrored the chaos of his public actions. His marriage to Octavia, daughter of Claudius, was a strategic union intended to legitimize his claim to power. Yet Nero soon grew bored with her and began courting others with increasing audacity. His relationship with Poppaea Sabina, already married to his friend Otho, became the talk of Rome and a symbol of Nero's brazen immorality. Instead of modeling virtue, the emperor became a living emblem of moral decay. The affair with Poppaea would become yet another turning point, marked by violence and tragedy. Nero's intense obsession with his mistress drove him to divorce Octavia and wed Poppaea in 62 AD, but not before he engineered Octavia's execution under fabricated accusations of infidelity. Octavia, deeply beloved by the Roman populace, became yet another victim of Nero's personal ambitions, and her death severely tarnished what remained of the emperor's reputation. It also laid bare his readiness to sacrifice even innocent kin to fulfill his desires. However, even his marriage to the woman he claimed to love could not temper Nero's violent urges. In 65 AD, during Poppaea's second pregnancy, Nero allegedly ended her life in a fit of uncontrolled rage. Though the precise details of her death are debated among historians, contemporary sources recount a violent quarrel that concluded with Nero delivering a fatal kick to his pregnant wife. The same emperor who once professed love for Poppaea had slain both her and their unborn child. In a single outburst of fury, her death marked a further descent into Nero's moral disintegration. The ruler who had already ended the lives of his stepbrother, mother, and first wife had now claimed his second spouse and unborn heir. Each killing seemed to lower the threshold for the next, each act of brutality eroding what little remained of his conscience. A pattern was emerging. Anyone who entered Nero's inner circle risked death, no matter their loyalty or blood ties. As Nero's reign advanced, his conduct grew ever more erratic and capricious. He issued death sentences on a whim, seized property to support his lavish lifestyle, and compelled Rome's elite to take part in his theatrical spectacles under threat of execution. The imperial court devolved into a bizarre fusion of pageantry and fear, where nobles could never tell whether they would be called upon to cheer a performance or witness a beheading. Nero's grandiose self-image extended beyond the stage into the realm of construction, with similarly ruinous effects. He initiated plans for a colossal new palace, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House, sprawling across Rome's center. This ambitious project required razing entire neighborhoods and displacing countless citizens. Yet to Nero, these disruptions were minor obstacles in pursuit of his architectural dream. The Golden House would eventually stand as the defining symbol of his vanity and his alienation from the Roman people's real concerns. For the citizens of Rome, who had once welcomed the youthful emperor with optimism, the years had brought only instability and mounting danger. Nero's flamboyant shows, costly building ventures, and personal scandals drained the treasury and forced oppressive tax hikes. More damning, they exposed a ruler more fixated on personal pleasure than on competent governance or the safeguarding of his empire. Then, on the night of the 18th of July, 64 AD, flames erupted in the merchant stalls near the Circus Maximus, the epicenter of Rome's celebrated chariot races. What began as a minor blaze rapidly engulfed the tightly packed districts of ancient Rome, driven by hot summer winds and the highly flammable wooden structures that made up much of the city. For 6 days and 7 nights, the flames swept across Rome, reducing entire neighborhoods to ash and displacing hundreds of thousands. When the inferno was finally subdued, only 4 of Rome's 14 districts had escaped damage. The eternal city stood scarred and smoldering, forever changed. The Great Fire of Rome would go down as one of antiquity's most catastrophic events, not only for its sheer destruction, but for the suspicions it ignited. Almost at once, whispers stirred among the dazed survivors. Rumors circulated that Emperor Nero had deliberately ignited the fire either to clear the way for his extravagant palace plans or out of a deranged desire to watch his capital burn. The enduring image of Nero playing music as the city was consumed by fire soon took hold. Though modern historians point out that the fiddle did not yet exist, and that Nero was in Antium, 35 miles away, when the blaze began, the legend proved more powerful than the facts. Regardless of whether he was responsible, Nero's reaction to the catastrophe offered a revealing portrait of both his governing skills and his emotional detachment. On one hand, he took practical steps to aid the suffering. He opened public spaces, and even his own gardens, to shelter the displaced, brought in grain supplies to stave off starvation, and enacted stricter building regulations, secluding wider streets, and the use of more fire-resistant materials to prevent future calamities. In these ways, he demonstrated that he could act decisively and effectively when required. Yet, his actions and demeanor during and after the fire also gave his enemies plenty of ammunition. Accounts began to circulate, claiming Nero had climbed to a high rooftop to witness the destruction and had sung a song he'd written about the fall of Troy, while flames devoured the city. Whether these stories were truth or politically motivated inventions, they mirrored the deepening public perception that Nero was cold-hearted, theatrical, and capable of turning a national tragedy into a personal stage. In the fire's wake, Nero found both a strategic advantage and a moral dilemma. The vast tracts of scorched land now available in central Rome offered a perfect site for the construction of his dream residence, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. Wasting no time, he launched the grandiose project, envisioning a sprawling estate with man-made lakes, lavish gardens, and cutting-edge architecture spread over more than 100 acres. But the palace's price would be staggering. At a moment when Rome needed every resource for reconstruction and aid, Nero turned to increasingly exploitative strategies to fund his architectural vision. He imposed heavier taxes, seized assets from the wealthy elite, and debased Rome's currency by lowering its silver content. These measures not only strained the economy, but also deepened the rift between the emperor and Rome's aristocracy, while ordinary citizens bore the brunt of the hardship. The emperor, who ought to have been focused on restoring his wounded city, instead exploited the disaster as justification for pursuing his extravagant architectural ambitions. In the wake of the Great Fire, Nero sought scapegoats, and this search gave rise to one of the most infamous events of his rule, the first widespread persecution of Christians in Roman history. Though the Christian sect in Rome was small, their refusal to honor traditional Roman gods made them easy targets for blame. Nero, whether acting out of sincere conviction or calculated political maneuvering, chose to make the Christians pay for the blaze with their lives. The wave of persecution that followed displayed a level of brutality and imaginative cruelty that reflected the depths of Nero's sadism. These were not mere executions. They were spectacles. Christians were sewn into animal hides and savaged by wild dogs in public arenas. Others were crucified and displayed along Rome's roads. Most horrifically, some were coated in pitch and set ablaze to serve as human torches, providing grotesque illumination for Nero's evening garden festivities. The emperor, who had supposedly serenaded the fire, now lit his parties with burning bodies. The image of Christians aflame in Nero's gardens would become one of the most enduring and damning symbols of his reign, reinforcing his legacy as a true monster. Even Roman citizens who felt no kinship with Christian beliefs were appalled by the senseless cruelty on display. These persecutions exposed not just Nero's capacity for violence, but a profound absence of empathy in an emperor who turned human agony into theatrical entertainment. By 65 AD, Nero's rule had grown so chaotic and tyrannical that even his staunchest allies began to doubt whether the empire could endure under his command. His obsession with drama, reckless economic policies, and impulsive cruelty fostered a climate of dread and instability, reaching from the corridors of the palace to the distant provinces. Amid this atmosphere of mounting anxiety, a coalition of senators, equestrians, and military leaders conspired to end his reign, the most serious assassination attempt against Nero, the Pisonian conspiracy. Named after Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a respected and affluent senator chosen to succeed Nero, the plot embodied the hopes of many Romans. Piso represented everything Nero was not: cultured, principled, and loyal to Rome's traditional values. With a solid track record in public service, he was seen as a man of honor and sound judgment. The conspirators believed that placing Piso on the throne would bring about a return to order and end the madness of Nero's dictatorship. The conspiracy drew supporters from a wide swath of Roman society, highlighting the breadth of discontent. Senators like Flavius Scaevinus and Epicarus Quintianus, knights such as Claudius Senecio, and military officers like the tribune Subrius Flavus joined the cause. Most notably, the plot even included men from the Praetorian Guard, the very soldiers sworn to defend the emperor's life. The involvement of members of the Praetorian Guard underscored the collapse of confidence even among those sworn to protect Nero. The assassination plan itself was relatively simple. The conspirators intended to strike during the games at the Circus Maximus, a setting where the emperor would be amid a massive crowd and less protected. Flavius Scaevinus was to approach Nero, feigning the delivery of a petition, and stab him with a hidden blade. Other plotters, scattered throughout the arena, would ensure the assassination succeeded, and swiftly declare Piso as the new emperor before Nero's allies could react. This plan might have succeeded, if not for a critical misstep by a freedwoman named Epicharis. She attempted to gain further support from the naval officers at Misenum, but her overture to Volusius Proculus, a naval commander, backfired. Whether out of loyalty to the emperor or self-preservation, Proculus reported the conspiracy. This revelation triggered a harsh crackdown that would cost dozens of lives and further display Nero's descent into ruthless paranoia. Nero's reaction to uncovering the plot was both immediate and brutal. The emperor, whose rule had thus far endured thanks to fortune and the failures of his enemies, was now confronted with the truth that a large segment of Rome's elite wanted him dead. His response was to launch a violent purging that dwarfed even his prior acts of cruelty. Arrests began without delay, and imperial agents employed torture and threats to force confessions and uncover additional suspects. The series of trials and executions that followed revealed not just the scale of resistance to Nero's regime, but also the depth of his obsession with rooting out perceived threats. Many who died likely had no true link to the conspiracy, but their association with critics of the emperor or previous indiscretions sealed their fates. The investigation soon evolved into a broader purges to eliminate rivals and settle grudges stretching far beyond the original circle of conspirators. Among the most poignant casualties of Nero's paranoia was Seneca, his former teacher and advisor. Though Seneca had once played a key role in tempering the young emperor's rule and had worked to instill a sense of virtue, he was accused of complicity and forced to end his life. The philosopher, who had devoted himself to the study of ethics and wisdom, opened his veins in a hot bath, dictating his final words as he bled. His execution symbolized the victory of despotism over reason and the futility of moral education in the face of unchecked tyranny. Lucan, Seneca's nephew and a gifted poet of his era, met a similar fate. Accused of plotting against Nero, he was ordered to die. Before his death, he recited verses from his own epic on the Roman civil war's an act of poetic defiance in the face of oppression. Ironically, the emperor, who styled himself as a patron of the arts, was systematically erasing Rome's true creatives and thinkers, leaving the empire culturally hollow and ethically desolate. The crushing of the Pisonian plot signified a pivotal shift in Nero's rule, turning him from a flamboyant autocrat into a deeply paranoid despot who imagined threats at every turn. The ruler, who had once craved the cheers of the crowd, now governed through suspicion and terror, trusting no one and suspecting every Roman of plotting his demise. While the conspiracy's failure left Nero securely in power, it also marked the beginning of an era defined by isolation, delusion, and escalating brutality. In the aftermath, Nero's descent was complete. The emperor, who had once displayed occasional bursts of sound governance and concern for public welfare, now operated as an unhinged despot drawn from ancient nightmares. His conduct grew increasingly volatile, and even the most obsequious members of his court began to fear for their safety. Whispers circulated throughout the capital that the gods themselves had turned their backs on Rome, leaving it at the mercy of a lunatic sovereign. During this dark period, Nero's artistic delusions spiraled into grotesque self-indulgence. he devised a grand tour of Greece, intending to participate in artistic and athletic contests, convinced that he could showcase his unmatched brilliance to the Greek world. The notion of a Roman emperor competing in public games was outrageous to traditional Roman sensibilities. But Nero's hunger for applause and affirmation outweighed any concerns for imperial propriety. He spent lavishly on preparations, commissioning bespoke outfits, hiring performance trainers, and staging elaborate productions. When the Greek tour unfolded in 67 AD, it became a macabre satire of artistic merit. Nero entered a vast number of competitions in music, drama, and chariot racing, and unsurprisingly, triumphed in every one. The terrified adjudicators, keenly aware that their lives hinged on pleasing the emperor, declared him the victor, no matter the quality of his performances. Nero returned to Rome burdened with over 1,800 awards, genuinely believing he had proven himself the greatest artist of his age. As the emperor reveled in theatrical self-worship abroad, the empire faced real, pressing crises that demanded competent oversight. Provincial governors grappled with invasions, tax revenue dwindled, and the treasury verged on collapse due to Nero's reckless expenditures. Yet, the emperor remained disengaged from these vital concerns, immersed instead in his personal fantasy world of art and spectacle. The final unraveling of Nero's regime began in 68 AD, sparked by a revolt led by Gaius Julius Vindex, governor of Gallia Lugdunensis. While Vindex's rebellion lacked immediate military threat, it carried far greater symbolic weight. A senior provincial leader openly denouncing Nero's authority. This bold defiance emboldened other governors to reconsider their allegiance to a ruler more preoccupied with stagecraft than statecraft, and it exposed the crumbling foundations of Nero's imperial legitimacy. Nero's reaction to Vindex's uprising was, predictably, more theatrical spectacle than strategic action. Instead of swiftly deploying troops to crush the rebellion, the emperor squandered valuable time devising extravagant retributions for the insurgents and choreographing grandiose stage productions to commemorate his anticipated triumph. When he eventually mounted a military response, it was marked by a dangerous blend of arrogance and ineptitude, a further evidence of his profound detachment from the realities of governance and warfare. Events took a more ominous turn when Servius Sulpicius Galba, the authoritative governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, threw his support behind Vindex and boldly declared himself emperor. This move signaled the beginning of a broader political collapse, as confidence in Nero's leadership evaporated among the empire's highest-ranking officials.